Hi, ArcfieldWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Wednesday morning, November 22nd. A soaking rain event in the Mid-Atlantic region is now over. Certainly the first such type of event in many, many weeks. It's been very dry in much of the Mid-Atlantic region and all the way down to the Carolinas over the past several weeks. I generally expected 1.5 to 2.5 inches of rain throughout the area, and it seems like that is what fell last night. The only official report I've seen so far in terms of total rainfall amounts from last night's system, 1.81 inches at Philadelphia's airport, PHL, and I believe that was probably a good representation of what happened last night in terms of total rainfall across the I-95 corridor region and throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. That same system is now pushing up across the northern part of New England with some accumulating snow. In fact, accumulating snow all the way back down to upstate New York. And if you're in upstate New York or the interior sections of Maine, upstate Vermont, New Hampshire, you certainly can receive some decent accumulating snow over the next several hours. Not much cold air at all behind this system for the Mid-Atlantic region. Turns out to be basically a cool day on Thanksgiving and on Friday as well. Then it turns colder during the upcoming weekend, and much of next week will feature quite a few cold air masses across the nation. We'll talk about that over the next few minutes. I wanted to start off here with a look at a potential stratospheric warming event. We talked about this in the recent couple of weeks as something that could unfold latter part of November going into the early part of December. And indeed, that is still on track. Again, a stratospheric warming event. This is the current look at a temperature pattern across the northern hemisphere. What we're looking at right here in the center is the North Pole, and the U.S. is down here. And we're seeing kind of a typical polar vortex, a cold air centered over the polar region in the highest levels of the atmosphere. Again, we're looking way up in what we call the stratosphere. It's actually the 10 millibar height. And again, right now we're seeing basically what you would typically see this time of the year. That is kind of a polar vortex sitting right on top of the North Pole. Let's go out about 11 days into the early part of December, and quite a change in the pattern here. Again, the same kind of a look here with the North Pole right here, the U.S. located right in this particular region of this point of view. And this is from the GFS model, and we're going again from this current setup to this in 10 or 11 days or so, right in the early part of December. And right here, you have this relatively warm, it's still cold air, but relatively warm, a warming event here in the stratosphere, really showing up on the GFS model. And this is something we monitor during this time of the year in the northern hemisphere, because the stratospheric warming event causes a displacement of that polar vortex sitting over the pole, or can displace it southward from the pole into the North American side, or also onto the other side of the North Pole, onto the Siberia side of the North Pole. And in this particular case, we see this warming taking place here, and the polar vortex kind of shifts in this direction. And oftentimes, a stratospheric warming event or a displacement of the conventional polar vortex sitting on top of the North Pole will unleash some cold air masses from the high latitudes into the middle latitudes. Now, I will say it's no guarantee that the eastern U.S., for example, gets colder in relationship to a stratospheric warming event. Sometimes that cold air pushes into the western part of the U.S. Sometimes it pushes across the other side of the pole into the Siberian side of the pole. So while a stratospheric warming event does increase the chances of cold air outbreaks into the middle latitudes, again, we have to kind of check out the details over the next couple of weeks. But it's something we'll certainly monitor here. Again, it looks like it's unfolding for the early part of December, and sometimes the impact is not really felt for a couple of weeks. So maybe latter part of December going into January, we could have an impact, potentially some cold air outbreaks into the central and eastern U.S., but not a guarantee. Well, those set of maps were from the GFS model run. I just wanted to show one more map here related to the potential stratospheric warming event. This is from the European model for the same time frame, going out about 10 or 11 days right here into the early part of December. North Pole right here, and here is that warmer blob of air. Again, it's still cold air, but relative to normal, it's above normal temperature-wise, and certainly a shift from what is currently the situation with all that cold air sitting right on top of the pole. So I just wanted to add this particular map to show that there's confirmation amongst the computer forecast models that indeed a stratospheric warming event is unfolding, and it looks like it'll really be noticeable in the stratosphere by the early part of December. Well, let's get back to the continental U.S. and kind of the shorter term outlook here. Certainly we'll go through next week in terms of this temperature pattern here. Again, this soaking rain event did not have cold air on its backside here today and tomorrow. Relatively mild days in the Mid-Atlantic region compared to what we thought last week. It looked like last week that there would be a cold shot behind this system that is now causing some snow up across northern New England. But colder air, colder pattern does set up for this upcoming weekend and really through the bulk of next week. We're taking a look here at the ensemble run of the GFS from last night. We're looking at rolling 5-day temperature anomaly averages here. This is at the 850 millibar level. This is the current 5-day period. So on average, over this current 5-day period from today, the 22nd, through the 27th, colder than normal throughout much of the eastern 2/3 of the nation. Now we will progress through the remainder of November, and here we go now into days 4 to 8, the 25th to the 30th. Still continuation of a colder than normal pattern across much of the eastern 2/3 of the nation. We'll go out a little bit farther in time, all the way out now days 6 to 10, November 27th to December 2nd. Colder than normal in that rolling 5-day period throughout the eastern half of the nation. Now, as we get into the month of December, it kind of starts to fade away here from west to east in terms of that colder than normal weather pattern. Here we are at days 8 to 12, still hanging on in that 5-day period from November 29th to the 4th of colder than normal across the eastern third of the nation. Then go out a little farther in time, it starts to warm up throughout much of the nation. Here we are all the way out now into the first week of December, really December 5th to the 8th. Warmer than normal conditions return to the bulk of the nation. So it looks like this particular model run has a colder pattern setting up for this weekend, bulk of next week. After that, we can get to a warmer than normal pattern. Similarly, on the ensemble run of the European model, same kind of temperature pattern here unfolding with colder than normal, certainly by the weekend across much of the nation, and that continues through the bulk of next week. Then we may get warmer than normal again as we progress through the first, maybe into the second week of December. Here we are, the current 5-day period. Again, this is the ensemble run of the European model here. We keep moving forward here, similar to the GFS. Quite a cold pattern here. Here we are out days 6 to 10, November 27th to December 2nd. Impressively colder than normal here in the eastern half of the nation at that time. And again, similar to the GFS, it holds on here into the first week of December, and then we get generally a warmer than normal temperature pattern starting to show up across much of the nation by the time we get all the way out to December 2nd to December 7th time period. So that's pretty much a confirmation from the European model as to what the GFS model was seeing. And again, generally mild conditions over the next couple of days, but the colder pattern really starts to set up in the eastern part of the nation this upcoming weekend. Now let's take a look at the conventional GFS model run in terms of the 500 millibar height anomaly pattern. This is as we begin the day here on Wednesday, November 22nd. And the first thing I want to point out is lots of players on the field. We have all kinds of lows and highs all over the place in the middle part of the atmosphere, 500 millibars here, high pressure ridging here, and over here, and low pressure troughs over Greenland here, Hudson Bay region of Canada, kind of a deep wave across the Tennessee Valley region, all the way down to Mexico and up near the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. So lots of players on the field. That suggests an active weather pattern. It also suggests kind of a difficult weather pattern to decipher by the models and to forecast. There's all kinds of players on the field. We'll keep moving forward here and just look at some of the highlights as we go through the end of November into December. This is by the end of the work week here. Strong upper level trough centered over the Hudson Bay region of Canada by the end of this week, and then we go a little farther out in time. And remember last week we were talking about the ridge popping up across Alaska and west coast of Canada, and how that favored the influx of cold air into the U.S. It did not materialize for the middle of this week. However, over the weekend, the upcoming weekend, and into the early part of next week, this is a early Sunday morning forecast map. Look at this flow. It really sends some possible cold air outbreaks all the way into the central U.S. We have this, if you follow these lines and you correlate the wind flow with that particular pattern, indeed, it even have some cross-polar type flow here that could make its way all the way from Alaska, northwestern Canada, into the central U.S. Again, we're talking about the latter part of the upcoming weekend into the early part of next week. We'll go out a little bit farther in time. And again, lots of players on the field. We still have a lot of ridges and troughs showing up into the early part of next week. We'll go out a little bit farther in time, and certainly some troughs will have to be watched next week across the eastern part of the nation, because indeed we will have some cold air masses across the nation this weekend and next week. Well, let's wrap up with the surface forecast maps from the conventional run of the GFS last night at 0Z. Again, accumulating snow this morning and for the next several hours across upstate New York, northern Vermont, northern New Hampshire, western part of Maine, really much of Maine, maybe not the coastal regions, but this whole area right here across upstate New York and northern New England can get several inches of snow in some cases here. The soaking rain event is now over in the middle Atlantic region. Again, no influx of cold air behind it. Basically mild conditions the next couple of days in the middle Atlantic region. But here we go with the cold air outbreak across the western Great Lakes by the time we get to tomorrow morning, starting to show up here. And indeed, this cold front right here lies right in this region here by tomorrow night, and it passes through the mid-Atlantic region by the time we get to Friday night. This is the Friday night forecast map. There is a dry front right in here, and indeed it will usher in colder air for the upcoming weekend. And as we saw at the beginning part of this video discussion with those ensemble runs of a couple different models, colder pattern sets up this weekend across much of the nation and continues throughout the bulk of next week. It may warm up after that as we go into the second week of December, but certainly from this weekend through next week, a lot of cold air masses out across the U.S. Now, we'll have to watch a couple of low pressure areas. This is the forecast right now for Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening time frame. There will be low pressure just off the Carolina coast at the same time, kind of a reinforcing colder air mass pushes to the south and east from the north and west. And this will be a close call. Right now, it is not coalescing in terms of the moisture in the mid-Atlantic region, but it's something we'll have to watch. It's close enough call that it's something closely monitor. We have colder air to the north and west, moist air to the south and east. Indeed, this storm does develop enough, strengthen enough that it throws some moisture back across New England by the time we get to early next week. This is the Monday morning forecast map, and that could produce some snow across interior New England. And look at this cold shot, another cold shot here. And again, we have lots of cold air masses sitting around much of the nation throughout next week. This is all the way now into next Tuesday, and finally we'll go out into next Wednesday, a week from right now. And look at this 540 line. We talk about this as being kind of indicator about how cold this air mass is, all the way down into the Carolinas. This is often looked at as kind of a rain snow line. This 540 thickness is the thickness of that lowest half of the atmosphere from the ground level, or 1,000 millibars to 500 millibars. Generally, the lower the thickness, the lower the temperatures. And this is telling us we have cold air all the way down into the Carolinas by the middle part of next week. So a lot going on longer term. Stratospheric warming event continues to look like it is unfolding for late November, early to mid-December, and we'll see how that, what kind of cold air outbreaks it produces into the middle latitudes. That is often the result of a stratospheric warming event, the displacement, the breaking apart of the polar vortex, and that unleashes some cold air masses from the northern latitudes into the middle latitudes. Could be a factor for the central and eastern U.S. later in December, even going into the month of January. In the near term, a lot of cold air around the U.S. this weekend and next week, and we'll have to monitor each of those low pressure threats with all those cold air masses around, not only U.S. but Canada as well. That's it for now. For ArcfieldWeather.com, this has been meteorologist Paul Dorian.